In the quiet, fog-laden town of Ashford, the Halbrook mansion looms like a shadow over generations of whispered secrets. For decades, the Halbrook name was synonymous with wealth, charm, and sophistication, but beneath the polished veneer lies a chilling truth, a lineage scarred by manipulation, obsession, and unspeakable cruelty. Rumors swirl of vanished heirs, mysterious fires, and whispered confessions that never reached daylight. At the center of it all was one man, whose brilliance masked a sinister heart, a sociopath whose actions rippled far beyond the mansion walls, leaving broken lives and unanswered questions in his wake. As we unravel the Halbrook legacy, each revelation draws us deeper into a labyrinth of deceit, betrayal, and darkness that refuses to stay buried. What secrets did the walls witness? Who truly controlled the fate of the family? And at what cost? Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. Chapter 1. Shadows over Ashford. Ashford was a town where the mist clung to the cobblestones like a secret waiting to be whispered. Its streets seemed ordinary to the casual observer, yet every brick, every alleyway, held a story that the townsfolk dared not speak aloud. At the heart of this quiet town stood the Halbrook mansion, an architectural marvel with ivy-stained walls and wrought-iron gates that creaked under the wind. To the outside world, it was a symbol of prestige, a house of legacy and prosperity. But those who peered too closely sensed something more, an unease, a history dark enough to make the air grow heavy. The Halbrooks had long been celebrated for their wealth and influence, their social gatherings legendary among Ashford's elite. Yet beneath the grand dinners and polished smiles, whispers of unease trickled through the town. Children of the family had disappeared, fires had gutted parts of the mansion under suspicious circumstances, and staff who had served loyally often left abruptly, their eyes haunted by unspoken truths. Tonight, the mansion was silent, yet the walls themselves seemed to hum with expectation. In the library, a single candle flickered, casting shadows across the portraits of past Halbrooks, each face frozen in a half-smile, half-glare that suggested knowledge of sins long hidden. At the center of it all was Thomas Halbrook, the last in the line, a man whose charisma masked an unsettling intelligence. Rumor had it that he was unlike any ancestor, capable of manipulating events and people with a subtlety that left devastation in its wake. Yet Ashford's residents continued to speculate, weaving tales that teetered between myth and reality. The mansion, for all its grandeur, seemed alive, a sentinel holding stories that would not die. And in that darkness, the first tremors of the Halbrook legacy's true horror began to stir, unnoticed but inevitable. Next, we discover the secret that Thomas Halbrook has hidden for decades, a discovery that will shake the very foundation of Ashford. Chapter 2. The Vanished Heir. The morning sun struggled to pierce the heavy fog that blanketed Ashford, casting the town in an eerie silver-grey light. For decades, the Halbrook mansion had been a source of fascination, but today, whispers carried a new tension. An old journal had surfaced in the library, a leather-bound relic belonging to the last missing heir, Jonathan Halbrook. No one knew exactly when he vanished, only that his absence had left an invisible wound across the family. The journal's pages were brittle, ink faded, yet the words within hinted at unease far beyond ordinary family disputes. Jonathan wrote of shadows moving in corners, voices calling him in the dead of night, and glimpses of his own reflection twisting into someone unrecognizable. He spoke of his Uncle Thomas with admiration and fear in equal measure, a man whose charm drew people in, yet whose presence carried a suffocating control. Each entry seemed to tremble between reality and paranoia, leaving readers unsure whether Jonathan had been a victim of circumstance or a witness to something darker. Rumors in Ashford swirled like smoke. Some said Jonathan had run away to escape the suffocating influence of his family. Others whispered of a more sinister fate, claims of secret rooms, hidden passages, and a mansion that seemed to trap those within. The Halbrook name was powerful, but power often came at a cost, and Jonathan had discovered that the price was far higher than anyone could imagine. The journal ended abruptly, a page torn out as though someone, or something, wanted its story left unfinished. That empty space in the narrative became a puzzle, drawing curious minds like moths to a flame. The mansion had swallowed its secrets, but the echoes remained, whispering through the hallways for those willing to listen. Thomas Halbrook, sitting in the study's dim light, held the journal with a calm, practiced hand. His eyes, dark and unreadable, betrayed nothing. Yet beneath his composed exterior, the slightest twitch hinted at a man who knew far more than he would ever admit. The Halbrook legacy was far from over. It was only beginning, and Jonathan's disappearance was merely the first note in a symphony of secrets. Next, we discover the hidden passageways within the mansion, leading to truths even the family feared to face. Chapter 3. Secrets Beneath the Walls. The Halbrook mansion was more than its grand exterior suggested. Behind the ornate wallpaper and polished wood lay a labyrinth of hidden corridors and forgotten chambers, remnants of renovations that spanned centuries. Few had ventured beyond the public rooms, and fewer still had returned with stories that didn't carry a sense of unease. Tonight, the mansion felt alive, its walls whispering secrets to anyone who dared to listen. Thomas Halbrook moved silently along the library floorboards, candlelight flickering across his face. He paused at a section of the wall behind a towering bookcase. Few knew, and fewer would suspect, that this very panel concealed a staircase spiraling downward into darkness. With a practiced hand, he pushed the bookcase aside, revealing the cold stone steps that descended into the unknown. The air that escaped the hidden passage smelled of damp earth and age, a scent that carried history, but also something else, a quiet warning. The walls of the staircase were etched with faint, almost imperceptible markings, symbols Jonathan had once attempted to decipher in his journal, only to abandon the effort in fear. Each step deeper into the mansion felt like peeling back layers of a story that refused to be told. The deeper Thomas went, the heavier the air became, pressing against his chest with a weight that was almost tangible. At the bottom of the spiral, he entered a room long forgotten. Dust covered the floor, and cobwebs clung to the corners. Yet, amidst the decay, there were signs of life. Small objects carefully arranged, remnants of past rituals, or perhaps messages left for those who might follow. A single mirror stood against the far wall, its surface warped and cloudy. In its reflection, Thomas glimpsed fleeting shadows that did not belong to him. He could almost hear Jonathan's voice, carried faintly. On the air, "The walls remember everything." For centuries, the mansion had concealed its sins within these hidden spaces, guarding the legacy of the Halbrook family with an almost sentient vigilance. And yet, as Thomas turned to ascend the stairs, he felt that something had changed. The mansion's secrets were stirring, and the line between observer and participant was blurring. Next, we discover the first shocking revelation of the mansion's dark history, an event that altered the Halbrook family forever. Chapter 4. The First Curse. Centuries of wealth and influence had shielded the Halbrook family from prying eyes, but some events refused to remain buried, no matter how carefully the legacy was curated. It began with Eleanor Halbrook, a woman known for her sharp intellect and magnetic presence, yet cursed with a restless curiosity that would change the family forever. Eleanor had always sensed the mansion held more than walls and windows. On a stormy night in 1823, she wandered into the newly completed East Wing, a section rumoured to be off-limits. The air inside was thick with the scent of varnish, candle wax, and something older, almost metallic. As she explored, she discovered a small sealed chamber, its door hidden behind drapes heavy with dust. Compelled by a mixture of fear and fascination, Eleanor pried the door open. Inside, she found an altar-like structure, adorned with objects no one in polite society would dare to display: ritual masks, carved figurines, and a book bound in leather darker than night. The moment her fingers brushed the cover, a chill surged through the room. A whisper, almost inaudible, echoed in her mind. "The blood of Halbrook feeds the past, and will feed the future." Eleanor recoiled, but the words lingered, sinking into her thoughts like a seed that would sprout over generations. Within days, strange occurrences began. Servants reported cold spots, flickering lights and shadowy figures glimpsed in hallways. Family members fell into sudden illnesses, tempers flared inexplicably, and a sense of dread wrapped itself around the mansion like a living shroud. The so-called curse had begun, subtle yet undeniable, marking the Halbrooks as a family whose brilliance was inseparable from darkness. By the time Eleanor confided in her husband, it was too late. The mansion itself seemed to watch, its stone walls absorbing her words, storing the alongside the secrets of every Halbrook who came before. And though centuries would pass, the echoes of that first curse would ripple forward, shaping the fate of every heir in ways both subtle and catastrophic. Next, we discover the mysterious visitor whose arrival reignites the dormant horrors within the mansion's walls. Chapter 5. The Stranger at the Gate. The Halbrook mansion had long been a fortress of secrets, but on a grey, rain-soaked evening, the gates creaked open for a visitor no one expected. A figure appeared in the fog, cloaked and deliberate, moving with a calm that unsettled even the most stoic of servants. Word spread quickly. A stranger had arrived, asking for Thomas Halbrook. Thomas, sitting by the fireplace in the dim glow of candlelight, felt a chill that was not from the rain. Something about the visitor's presence tugged at memories he could not fully recall. The stranger carried an air of purpose, as though he had been waiting decades for this encounter. When he finally stepped into the grand hall, his eyes scanned the portraits of the Halbrook ancestors, lingering on faces that seemed to acknowledge him with silent warning. "You are Thomas Halbrook," the stranger said, voice smooth, almost too calm. "I've come to remind you of debts unpaid and promises broken." His words were careful, measured, yet they carried a weight that pressed heavily on the room. No one else spoke. The servants froze, sensing the tension that clung to every word. Thomas's pulse quickened, though he hid it well. He had spent years controlling appearances, yet this stranger, someone who seemed to know the mansion and its history in intimate detail, was unsettling. He spoke of events long buried, of secrets Eleanor had tried to keep hidden, and of Jonathan's disappearance, threading them into a story of curses and consequences that refused to stay dormant. As the visitor's tale unfolded, the mansion itself seemed to respond. A draught whispered through the hall, and shadows twisted unnaturally along the walls. Every word brought Thomas closer to a revelation he had long avoided. The stranger's final remark was chilling, almost prophetic. "The walls remember everything, Thomas, and now they are awake." Thomas felt a shiver run down his spine, realizing that the Halbrook legacy, carefully curated, meticulously protected, was no longer under his control. The past had arrived at the door, cloaked in flesh and intent, demanding attention in a way nothing else ever had. Next, we discover the first clue that Jonathan may not have disappeared by accident, but by design. Chapter 6. The Journal of Shadows. The mansion was quieter than usual the night Thomas returned to the library, the stranger's words still echoing in his mind. He felt an almost magnetic pull toward Jonathan's old journal, the one that had surfaced months ago, brittle with age, yet heavy with secrets. Thomas had read it countless times before, but tonight, with the stranger's warnings lingering, every line seemed to hum with meaning. Sitting by the fireplace, candlelight trembling across the pages, he traced Jonathan's words slowly. References to hidden rooms, cryptic symbols, and glimpses of shadowy figures became more than idle musings. They were instructions, clues left behind by a mind desperate to be understood. One passage caught Thomas's eye. "The shadows have memory. They wait for those who are careless, those who think they can uncover what was never meant to be seen. I fear I am too late." Thomas frowned. The words were unsettling, but one phrase stood out. Too late. Was Jonathan warning himself, or the next Halbrook to walk these halls? As he flipped through the pages, a folded note fell from between the journal's leaves. The handwriting was unmistakably Jonathan's, and the words were even more disturbing. "Beneath the east wing, the truth sleeps, but awaken it, and the mansion will remember you." The journal, for the first time, seemed to breathe in Thomas's hands. Shadows from the corners of the library seemed to shift, as though reacting to the revelation. The mansion was no longer just a backdrop. It was an active participant, a living archive of every Halbrook's triumphs and transgressions. Thomas understood now. Jonathan's disappearance was not a mere accident. He had uncovered something dangerous, something powerful enough to terrify even the most cunning of minds. And whoever, or whatever, had claimed him was waiting for the next to trespass too. He next to pry into the shadows. The candle flickered violently, and Thomas felt the temperature drop. The mansion's secrets were patient, but patient did not mean forgiving. Each clue Jonathan had left was a breadcrumb, a path leading deeper into a history too macabre to contemplate fully. Next, we discover the hidden ritual room that may explain the mansion's haunting and the family's dark legacy. Chapter 7. The Ritual Room. Thomas's hands trembled slightly as he followed the directions Jonathan had left in his journal. The east wing, long rumored to hold hidden passages, felt different tonight. The walls seemed to breathe around him, the faint whisper of the past brushing against his ears. He pressed on, guided by instinct, candlelight flickering across portraits of ancestors who seemed to glare in warning. Behind a false panel, he discovered a narrow doorway. The air beyond smelled of earth and old incense, thick and almost suffocating. A staircase descended steeply into darkness, each step echoing like a heartbeat. At the bottom, Thomas entered a chamber unlike anything he had seen in the mansion before. The floor was etched with concentric circles, strange symbols carved deep into the stone, and in the center stood an altar draped in black velvet. Candles, long melted to stubs, suggested that rituals had been performed here repeatedly, their purpose obscured by time. Objects littered the room. Figurines carved from bone, jars filled with substances that could not be named, and tattered books whose pages were smeared with a dark residue. Every item seemed purposeful, arranged with precision, as if the room itself demanded order amidst chaos. Thomas's eyes fell on a single chair facing the altar, its backrest engraved with a familiar motif, the Halbrook crest, twisted in a way that made it feel almost sinister. The deeper he explored, the more he realized the room was designed not for worship, but for control. The symbols, the objects, the arrangement, they all spoke of a power the Halbrooks had long sought to master, a legacy hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right, or wrong, hands to awaken it. A sudden chill made Thomas shiver. He sensed he was not alone, though the room was empty. A whisper, almost imperceptible, seemed to come from the walls themselves. "So, some doors once opened, do not close." He shivered again, understanding that the mansion's secrets were not inert. They were alive, patient, and vigilant. Thomas realized, with a mixture of dread and fascination, that this ritual room was at the heart of the family's power and its curse. Jonathan had stumbled upon it, and perhaps that had been his undoing. Now, the responsibility and the danger fell upon him. Next, we discover the hidden messages left by Jonathan within the mansion, hinting at a truth even Thomas fears to confront. Chapter 8. Messages in the Dark. The mansion's hidden chamber had left Thomas restless. He returned to the library, journal in hand, determined to trace Jonathan's final steps before he vanished. The air felt heavier tonight, as if the mansion itself was aware of his curiosity. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the floorboards, and every creak of the old mansion sounded amplified, almost deliberate. Thomas studied Jonathan's notes carefully. Hidden within seemingly mundane descriptions were coded messages, subtle directions that suggested the heir had known more than anyone suspected. Symbols scribbled in the margins, letters out of place, and drawings of hallways and rooms. These were not random. They were warnings, breadcrumbs, and possibly clues to survive what lay ahead. Following Jonathan's cryptic guidance, Thomas moved through the mansion with new eyes. In the servants' quarters, a loose floorboard revealed a small tin box containing letters Jonathan had left behind. The handwriting was shaky, fear etched into every stroke. One letter read, "Do not trust the rooms that breathe. The walls remember. They choose who will leave and who will remain. Some truths are protected by shadows, and some shadows are alive." Another letter described faint scratches on the walls in certain hallways, almost like a code. Jonathan had tried to map them, connecting them to the family's tragedies, and Thomas realized that the mansion itself was like a living puzzle, hiding its darkest secrets in plain sight. The deeper Thomas delved, the more he sensed eyes upon him, though he saw no one. Footsteps, soft but purposeful, echoed behind closed doors. The mansion had long absorbed its history, and now it seemed to be responding to his intrusion. Each discovery was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. He paused in the main hall, candlelight trembling against the walls, and felt the weight of centuries pressing down. The messages left by Jonathan were not merely warnings, they were a call to uncover the full truth of the Halbrook legacy, to face the darkness that had claimed the vanished heir. And yet Thomas wondered if some truths were meant to remain hidden, or if the mansion would allow him to leave once he learned them. Next, we discover the dark history of the Halbrook family's earliest known tragedy and the secrets that shaped the generations to come. Chapter 9. The Original Sin. Long before Thomas or Jonathan walked the halls of the mansion, the Halbrook legacy had been marked by a tragedy so profound that it would echo through generations. It began with Richard Halbrook, the family patriarch of the 1700s, a man as ambitious as he was ruthless. His vision for wealth and influence knew no moral bounds, and it was in the pursuit of this vision that the first true darkness took root. Richard had discovered a rare artifact during one of his travels abroad, a ceremonial dagger etched with strange runes and said to hold power beyond comprehension. Legends claimed it could secure prosperity, but only at a steep, invisible price. Ignoring the warnings of local elders, Richard brought it home to Ashford, enthralled by the promise of control and legacy. Soon after, strange occurrences began within the mansion. Servants vanished mysteriously, livestock fell ill without explanation, and the once stalwart family pets turned wild with inexplicable fear. Rumors began to circulate. A curse had fallen upon the Halbrooks, rooted in Richard's arrogance. He, however, dismissed the stories, believing himself untouchable, a man above superstition and fear. Then came the night that defined the family's history. During a lavish banquet celebrating the completion of the East Wing, the dagger disappeared from its secured display. That very evening, Richard's eldest child, Eleanor's ancestor, was found lifeless in the garden, her expression frozen in terror. No one saw how she had died, and the dagger was never recovered. Whispers claimed that the artifact demanded a sacrifice, marking the beginning of the Halbrook curse. The mansion, already a symbol of wealth, now became a repository of fear. Every generation was subtly shaped by this original sin, a compulsion to seek power, the shadow of tragedy always close behind. For centuries, Brooks had lived with the consequences, and though many tried to rationalize the events, the truth lingered, undeniable and persistent. Thomas stood in the dim library, absorbing the story. The patterns of disappearance, the hidden passages, the ritual room, it all connected back to Richard's folly. The family's legacy of charm and prestige had always been intertwined with darkness, and now, centuries later, that darkness was stirring once again. Next, we discover the first modern victim of the Halbrook curse, whose fate is eerily connected to Jonathan's disappearance.
Did you know one of the most famous real haunted houses in history was Borley Rectory in Essex, England? Built in 1863, it gained a reputation for bizarre paranormal activity, including unexplained footsteps, phantom bells ringing, objects moving on their own, and apparitions seen by multiple witnesses. Famous paranormal investigator Harry Price documented hundreds of alleged events there in the early 20th century, leading it to be dubbed the most haunted house in England. The building was destroyed by fire in 1939, but accounts of ghostly sightings continued even afterward.
Chapter 10. The First Modern Victim. The town of Ashford had grown complacent over the centuries, the Halbrook mansion viewed as an eccentric relic rather than a place of menace. But the past never truly sleeps. On a quiet autumn evening, a young maid named Lillian, newly hired and eager to prove herself, found herself alone in the East Wing, tasked with cleaning the long-abandoned rooms. The air was thick and musty, carrying the faint scent of candle wax and decay. Lillian's footsteps echoed across the polished floors, but a subtle vibration underfoot made her pause. She glanced at the faded portraits lining the hallway. The eyes of the ancestors seemed to follow her, their painted faces imbued with silent judgment. She tried to shake off the unease, attributing it to imagination, or so she told herself. Then she noticed the floorboard. A small, nearly invisible panel had shifted slightly. Curiosity, that dangerous human trait, urged her to lift it. Beneath lay a narrow space, filled with dust and cobwebs, and in the faint light, Lillian spotted something startling. A collection of objects arranged meticulously. Dried flowers, old coins, and a small, intricately carved figurine resembling a child. Her heart skipped. The objects seemed familiar, almost as if she had seen them in the descriptions Jonathan had left behind in his journal. Suddenly, a cold draught swept through the corridor, extinguishing her candle. The shadows seemed to thicken, pressing in on her. Lillian tried to retreat, but the floor beneath her creaked, as if the mansion itself had recognized her intrusion. Then came the whisper, faint but unmistakable. "Some doors, once opened, do not close." By morning, the servants discovered Lillian collapsed in the hallway, trembling and incoherent. She could not, or would not, explain what had happened. Her hands bore faint scratches, her uniform was torn, and her eyes held the haunted look of someone who had glimpsed the unseen. The mansion had claimed its first modern victim, a warning to those who dared disturb the Halbrook legacy. Thomas, reviewing the incident later, understood the implications. The mansion's power was growing, awakened by those who probed too deeply. Jonathan's disappearance was not an isolated event. It was a pattern, and Lillian's fate was the first modern echo of centuries-old curses. Next, we discover the mysterious letters that Lillian left behind, messages hinting at a malevolent presence lurking within the mansion. Chapter 11. The Letters of Fear. In the days following Lillian's collapse, Thomas discovered something unexpected. Letters she had written in secret, hidden beneath her mattress in the servants' quarters. The writing was hurried, jagged with fear, but the content was far more chilling than the mere act of hiding them. Each letter described sensations she could not name, presences she could not see, and whispers that seemed to come from the very walls of the mansion. "I hear them at night," one letter read. "Shadows moving where none should be, voices calling my name, footsteps that echo mine, but are not mine. The house watches, and it knows." Another letter contained crude sketches, hallways twisting impossibly, doors that led nowhere, and symbols resembling those found in the ritual room. Lillian wrote that she had felt compelled to place objects in certain rooms, arranging them exactly as the mansion seemed to demand. It was as if the house itself guided her hands, orchestrating a ritual beyond her comprehension. Thomas read and reread the letters, the dread building with every word. Lillian's accounts confirmed something he had feared all along. The mansion was more than a home. It was a living entity, a repository of the Halbrook family's darkest impulses, and it actively sought to manipulate those who entered its domain. Every generation, every heir, every servant who strayed too close became a participant in its unseen schemes. The most disturbing letter ended abruptly, mid-sentence, with a jagged tear where the rest of the paper had been ripped away. A faint smear of something dark, perhaps ink, perhaps something else, left Thomas with the undeniable sense that the mansion had intervened, ensuring its secrets remained partially hidden. Thomas realized that Jonathan's disappearance, Lillian's terror, and the mansion's intricate network of hidden rooms and symbols were all connected. The Halbrook legacy was a web of control, carefully designed to ensnare anyone who dared to probe too deeply. And now, the mansion had eyes on him, waiting to see if he would continue the chain or become the next victim. Next, we discover the first glimpses of Thomas's own encounter with the mansion's malevolent will, a presence that begins to speak directly to him in whispers only he can hear. Chapter 12. Whispers in the Hall. Night had settled over the Halbrook mansion, the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow both sound and reason. Thomas walked the long hallways alone, the flicker of a single candle barely pushing back the shadows. Every step echoed unnaturally, though the halls were empty. He felt it before he heard it, a subtle shift in the air, like the house was breathing, observing, waiting. Then the whispers began, faint at first, curling around the edges of his mind. Thomas. Thomas. He froze, gripping the candle tighter. The voice was soft, intimate, yet layered with menace. It carried knowledge only someone deeply tied to the mansion could possess. He glanced at the portraits lining the walls. Their painted eyes seemed to gleam in the dim light, as if sharing a silent conspiracy. "Why do you linger?" the voice hissed, almost behind his ear. "You were warned. You should leave." Thomas's pulse quickened, but a mixture of fear and curiosity propelled him forward. The whispers guided him toward the east wing, toward the familiar concealed staircase leading to the ritual room. Every step he took seemed heavier, as though the mansion was subtly resisting him, testing his resolve. When he reached the ritual chamber, the whispers intensified, no longer just voices. They became murmurs of accusation, of history, of memories that weren't his own. Shadows shifted across the walls, curling unnaturally around the corners, forming shapes that suggested movement, intent, even malice. Thomas realized that the mansion's consciousness was no mere legend. It was alive, patient, and intelligent. And then he understood. The whispers were not just warnings. They were invitations, daring him to confront the legacy of the Halbrooks in its purest, most terrifying form. To ignore them would be folly. To follow them meant risking everything. Septimus Stead, eyed himself, inhaled sharply, and whispered back to the shadows, "Show me the truth." Next, we discover the mansion's true memory. Visions of the Halbrook family's darkest deeds revealed to Thomas in a terrifying clarity. Chapter 13. Visions of the Past. Thomas had always believed that history was something you read about, studied, and occasionally feared. But the Halbrook mansion had a different way of teaching, one that could not be ignored. As he stood in the ritual room, the whispers surrounding him grew louder, no longer mere sounds, but a flood of images and sensations that seized his mind. The walls seemed to pulse with light and shadow. Suddenly, Thomas was not himself. He was observing through the eyes of Eleanor, centuries ago, as she wandered the east wing and discovered the chamber that would become the family's curse. He felt her awe, her fear, the first tremors of the mansion's malevolent will. Then the scene shifted. He was Jonathan, hiding, scribbling warnings into the journal, trying desperately to make sense of shadows that moved of their own accord. Visions of fires, disappearances, and whispered conspiracies unfolded around him. A servant tripped down the narrow staircase, falling into darkness. A child screamed in a locked room that no one could find. Each scene played out in horrific clarity, as if the mansion itself had recorded every moment, every sin, every act of cruelty and fear. Thomas felt himself torn between observer and participant. Each vision left an impression on his body, a chill, a racing heartbeat, the sense of being watched by unseen eyes. He saw how every generation of Halbrooks had contributed to the mansion's legacy, ambition and arrogance feeding its hunger, mistakes echoing into the next century, consequences ignored until they became unavoidable. By the time the visions receded, Thomas's knees buckled. The candle flickered violently, and for a moment he wondered if he could even trust his own senses. The mansion's memory was not passive, it was alive, and it demanded recognition. Every shadow, every whisper, every hidden passage was part of a narrative far larger than any single Halbrook could contain. Next, we discover the chilling truth behind the mansion's most recent anomaly, a disturbance that threatens to unravel Thomas's very sanity. Chapter 14. The disturbance. Thomas thought he had begun to understand the mansion, its history, its secrets, its cruel intelligence. But some truths are too vast, too insidious, to be contained by mere comprehension. On a night when the wind howled like a living creature through the Ashford streets, the mansion made itself known in a way Thomas could not ignore. It began subtly. The faint rattling of a door that was long locked, a chill that spread through his bones despite the fireplace's warmth, and shadows that no candle could fully banish. Then came the sound, soft, deliberate footsteps pacing the upper hallways, though Thomas was certain he was alone. He gripped the journal tighter, hoping it could offer guidance, but the inked words seemed suddenly distant, almost mocking. The disturbance escalated quickly. Portraits of past Halbrooks flickered in the candlelight as though alive, their painted eyes following him with new intensity. Whispers returned, sharper now, almost angry. "You should not have come. You should not have touched the past." Thomas realized the mansion was reacting, angry, aware, and dangerous. A gust of wind slammed a door shut behind him, and the candle went out. Darkness enveloped him, thick and suffocating. In that blackness, Thomas felt an almost tangible presence pressing against him, something not human, yet undeniably intelligent. The mansion had decided to make itself felt, not through subtle hints, but through raw, undeniable force. Thomas's pulse raced, but he forced himself to focus. This disturbance was more than spectral trickery. It was a test. The mansion, with all its memories and malice, wanted to see if he could withstand its power, if he could face the truths buried in its walls. By the time the wind died down, Thomas was drenched in sweat, shaken to the core. The mansion had revealed its teeth tonight, and he knew one thing's. With certainty, nothing within Ashford would ever be safe again, and every secret left unexamined carried consequences beyond comprehension. Next, we discover a shocking family secret hidden in the mansion's oldest chamber, one that could change Thomas's understanding of the Halbrook legacy forever. Chapter 15. The Oldest Chamber. Thomas had explored most of the mansion, or so he believed. But deep beneath the east wing, past the ritual room and hidden corridors, lay a chamber older than any other. It had been sealed for generations, its door reinforced with iron and arcane symbols that even the Halbrooks of old had feared to tamper with. Tonight, drawn by the whispers and the mansion's restless energy, Thomas found it. The chamber smelled of earth and decay, its walls etched with unfamiliar runes that pulsed faintly in the candlelight. Every step Thomas took made the floorboards groan, as though warning him away. Yet curiosity, dangerous, irresistible, propelled him forward. At the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, upon which rested a small chest, tarnished by centuries. Thomas hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside were documents and artifacts far older than anything he had seen in the mansion. Letters written in a delicate, almost indecipherable script, drawings of rituals and family trees, and a sealed vial containing a substance dark as night. The documents revealed the Halbrook lineage in stark clarity, hidden alliances, betrayals, and acts of cruelty meticulously recorded, each ancestor aware of the mansion's power, yet unable or unwilling to resist it. A folded note lay atop the collection. Thomas unfolded it carefully. "To the last of our line who dares to read. The mansion is not merely ours. It watches, chooses, and punishes. Some of us were instruments, some were victims, and some became both. The truth will demand a price. Choose wisely." Thomas realized that the oldest chamber was a repository not just of history, but of judgment. The mansion had preserved this knowledge deliberately, forcing each Halbrook who discovered it to confront the entirety of their legacy, the brilliance, the cruelty, the obsession, and the curse, the weight of seeing. Centuries pressed on him, yet the allure of the truth was irresistible. As he turned to leave, the shadows seemed to shift, pointing toward the hall beyond. The mansion had more to show, more to reveal, and Thomas knew that what awaited him could alter his understanding of family, power, and darkness forever. Next, we discover the chilling revelation about Thomas's own connection to the Halbrook curse, an inheritance more sinister than he could imagine. Chapter 16. The Inherited Curse. The mansion had unveiled centuries of secrets, yet Thomas had not fully grasped the most personal truth. The curse was not only a family legacy, it was his inheritance. The oldest chamber had hinted at it, but only now, piecing together Jonathan's journal, the ritual room, and the mansion's reactions, did Thomas feel the weight of inevitability pressing upon him. Every Halbrook had contributed to the mansion's dark intelligence, willingly or not. But Thomas sensed a difference. He was the first to face it knowingly, to confront the whispers, the visions, and the labyrinthine corridors with awareness. The mansion did not merely haunt him, it tested him, probed his fears, and measured his resolve. The curse, patient as it was, had chosen its next participant. A series of symbols in Jonathan's journal now made sense. They mapped not just the mansion's rooms, but the flow of energy, the channels of influence that the Halbrooks had unknowingly maintained. The ritual room, the oldest chamber, even the hidden messages left by Lillian, they all converged to one truth. Thomas was bound by blood to the mansion's will. The curse was encoded into his very existence. He felt it then, subtle yet undeniable. A pull from the shadows, a soft murmur threading into his thoughts. Your choice is ours. Your legacy is ours. Accept or resist and suffer. The mansion was alive, aware, and it was claiming him. For the first time, Thomas understood the magnitude of the Halbrook legacy. Every disappearance, every ritual, every tragedy had led to this moment. The mansion had been waiting for him, preparing him and testing him. To ignore the inheritance was impossible. To embrace it was terrifying. Thomas clenched his fists, heart hammering, and whispered to the shadows, "I will face it. I will see it through." The mansion seemed to respond, the air thickening, as if acknowledging his decision. But even as he accepted the inevitability, he knew the path ahead would demand more than courage. It would demand sacrifice. Next, we discover the first confrontation with the mansion itself, as Thomas steps into a trial that could decide his fate. Chapter 17. Trial of Shadows. Thomas's acceptance of the inheritance brought no relief, only a heavier awareness. That night, the mansion seemed to awaken fully, corridors stretching, shadows thickening, whispers growing into a chorus of judgment. The candlelight flickered, and with every step, the walls themselves seemed to shift, subtly, unnervingly. The mansion was no longer a silent observer, it was a participant in his trial. Guided by instinct and Jonathan's coded directions, Thomas descended to the ritual room once more. The floor markings glimmered faintly, symbols reacting to his presence. Shadows pooled in the corners, writhing as if alive. A voice echoed through the chamber, both inside and outside his mind. Face what you fear, or become part of it. The trial was not physical. It was a challenge of perception, memory, and willpower. Visions assaulted him. The vanished heir Jonathan, Eleanor's discovery of the first curse, Lillian's terror. Every figure he had encountered seemed to step from the shadows, accusing, pleading, mocking. Thomas was forced to confront the family's sins, each one layered upon the last, the weight crushing and inescapable. He moved carefully through the room, tracing the symbols and touching the artifacts, attempting to anchor himself. The mansion tested his focus, amplifying doubt, fear, and guilt. At one point, he was certain the shadows would claim him entirely, folding him into their darkness. But each time he remembered the journal, the letters, and his own resolve, he forced himself to push forward. Hours, or was it minutes, passed. The mansion's trial was relentless, a slow-burning test designed to break him mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Yet Thomas persisted, realizing that the shadows were not merely punishing him, they were demanding recognition of the full Halbrook legacy, the acknowledgement of centuries of arrogance, cruelty, and obsession. Finally, the shadows recoiled slightly, as though measuring his endurance. The mansion had not surrendered, but it had recognized his determination. Thomas felt a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air, as though a door had opened, not physically but spiritually, an invitation to understand, not merely to observe. Next, we discover the revelation hidden at the heart of the mansion, the secret that explains why the Halbrook curse has persisted for centuries. Chapter 18. Heart of the Mansion. Thomas had survived the trial of shadows, yet the mansion's secrets were far from exhausted. Following the subtle shifts in the ritual room, he moved deeper into the bowels of the east wing, guided by instinct and the faint whispers that had now become familiar. There, behind another concealed panel, he discovered a staircase descending even further, into a chamber older than the oldest room, untouched by light or human hands for generations. The air grew thick and almost electric, Symbols on the walls pulsed faintly, casting long shadows across the cold stone floor. At the center of the chamber lay a massive obsidian orb, smooth and unnervingly perfect, sitting atop a pedestal carved with the Halbrook crest. Thomas felt the weight of centuries pressing down through the stone, the whispers of ancestors and victims merging into a single, low hum that seemed to vibrate through his very bones. Approaching the orb, he realized this was the mansion's heart, the source of its awareness, the repository of its memory, the anchor of the curse that had plagued the family for generations. Every ritual, every disappearance, every act of ambition or cruelty had been recorded here, feeding the mansion's intelligence. The orb seemed to respond to his presence, flickering with shadows of the past. Eleanor discovering the first chamber, Jonathan writing his warnings, Lillian trembling in fear. A voice, neither fully male nor female, ancient yet immediate, resonated within his mind. "You have come, as was intended. Here lies the truth. All that was, all that is, all that will be. It exists because of your line. Accept it and understand. Resist, and it will consume you." Thomas realized that the mansion had always been more than stone and wood. It was a living testament to the Halbrook legacy, an intelligence forged from centuries of fear, ambition, force, and suffering. To confront it was to confront himself, to face the weight of history and the consequences of bloodlines steeped in darkness. For the first time, Thomas understood the full scope of what had shaped the family, the town, and the mansion itself. And with understanding came a choice, one that could either break the curse or allow it to endure for generations to come. Next, we discover the decision Thomas must make, and the consequence that will determine the future of the Halbrook legacy. Chapter 19. The Choice. Thomas stood before the obsidian heart of the mansion, the air heavy with centuries of whispers and unspoken judgment. Every shadow, every symbol, every echo of the past seemed to converge on him, waiting for a decision. This was the moment Jonathan's journal and Lillian's letters had led to, the point where knowledge became responsibility and curiosity transformed into consequence. The mansion's voice resonated within him, low and commanding. "Accept the legacy. Bear the weight of the curse, and it will shape you. Refuse, and all that was created will collapse, consuming the unprepared." Thomas could feel the pulse of power thrumming from the obsidian orb, as though the mansion itself was testing his resolve. He considered what it meant to accept: endless vigilance, a life entwined with shadows and whispers, a constant struggle against the mansion's will. Yet to refuse was no easier. The mansion had already claimed those who ignored its presence, leaving emptiness and fear in their wake. Either choice was perilous. Memories of the vanished heir, of Eleanor, of Lillian, and of every ancestor who had faltered in their own way filled his mind. Their experiences were warnings, lessons encoded into the mansion itself. Thomas realized that the Halbrook legacy was not simply a matter of blood or wealth. It was a responsibility, a burden that demanded courage, intellect, and resilience. Taking a deep breath, Thomas extended his hand toward the orb. Shadows rippled and twisted around him, as if testing his resolve one final time. With quiet determination, he spoke aloud. "I will bear it. I will face it. I will learn, and I will endure." The chamber responded immediately. The oppressive weight lifted slightly, the whispers softening into something almost approving. The mansion had acknowledged him, not as a mere heir, but as a participant in its contest, Newham, a guardian of its memory and power. The curse would persist, but now with purpose, guided by a mind capable of understanding its intricacies. Next, we discover the resolution of the Halbrook saga and the fate of Thomas as he steps into his role as master and witness of the mansion's dark legacy. Chapter 20. Legacy of Shadows. The mansion had fallen silent. Not a whisper, not a creak, only the low hum of the obsidian heart, steady and eternal. Thomas stood in the center of the ritual chamber, the weight of centuries pressing lightly, now tempered by understanding. The shadows that had once threatened and whispered were still present, but they no longer seemed hostile. They were watchful, expectant, as if the mansion itself had accepted him as its guide rather than its victim. Months passed. Thomas learned to read the subtle cues of the mansion, the flicker of shadows, the pulse in the floor, the temperature shifts that marked unseen corridors. He restored order to the hidden chambers, arranging symbols and artifacts with care, respecting their history without yielding to fear. Slowly, the mansion responded in kind. Rooms that had long resisted illumination now welcomed candlelight. Hidden staircases revealed themselves without hostility, and whispers became quiet guides rather than threats. Thomas understood the full scope of the Halbrook legacy. Every ancestor, every vanished heir, every act of ambition or cruelty had shaped the mansion, embedding memories and intelligence into its very stones. And he, now fully aware, became the first to navigate it with purpose. The curse had not been lifted, it could not be, but it had been tempered by wisdom, vigilance, and choice. From the library, he gazed at the portraits of his ancestors, seeing not only their arrogance and failures, but also the resilience threaded through generations. The mansion had demanded much, but it had given much in return: knowledge, perspective, and the understanding that legacy is as much about survival as it is about power. As night fell over Ashford, the fog drifting around the mansion seemed softer, almost protective. The town remained unaware of the depth of history housed in its most enigmatic residence. Thomas, keeper of secrets and witness to shadows, understood that some mysteries were not meant to be solved. They were meant to be understood, respected, and endured. And so, the Halbrook legacy continued, its darkness present but guided, its secrets preserved, and its knowledge tempered by one who dared to face it fully. The mansion was alive, yes, but now it had a steward, a mind capable of seeing both the beauty and terror within its walls. The end.